Hi everyone, welcome back to my craft room. I am a big fan of the game Hades. I have already made an Artemis cosplay and I have sunk so many hours into it. It's so fun. So when I saw that they were making a sequel and they released character art for our main girl, Melinoe, I knew I had to make it. I already know I'm gonna love the game. Had to make it. The game had a tentative release date of October of 2023, so I thought I could definitely finish her in time for the release of the game, and that deadline has come and gone. It is well past that date, and the game is not even fully out yet. It is in early access mode, and will I pay for a game that's in early access mode? No, but will I make an entire cosplay of a game I have not even played? Yeah, make it make sense. I wanted to have her done for KatsuCon of 2024, but I had some other cosplays that I was committed to finishing, like my Sakizo cards build, and then I wanted to focus all of my energy into my Tanakh Aloy, which you watched me build on this channel. And I gotta say, that work really paid off. No regrets. On top of that, I moved halfway through this build, so she has just been sitting in a box, and I feel guilty every time I come into this craft room. So in this video, I am finishing Melinoe. And hey, I still think I'm gonna have her done before the full game releases, so I'm great at deadlines, actually. Luckily, I took some video last year of what I was working on. Not a ton, but enough that I can get you up to speed on what I actually have finished for her. The first thing I did was 3D printed and finished all of her accessories.
I printed everything out on my 3D printer and took it to my garage for prep. Her sickle and dagger needed the most prep, so that's what you'll see me working on first. I used a combination of epoxy and some plastic cement to glue everything together. This is all pretty fumey, so do it outside and with a respirator and gloves. I really like getting anything I need 3D printed before I start anything else on the cosplay. I actually had printed stuff for 4 cosplays and then just worked on finishing everything at the same time, so if you see some stuff that doesn't fit in, that's why. Then, to conceal the seams and hide some of the more egregious layer lines, I mixed up some Bondo body filler and put it on there. I went a little too hard with the Bondo. It was my first time using it and I caked it on there. Way too thick. It didn't ruin anything, it just took a while to sand, but I knocked back the bulk of it with my rotary tool, and it really did just obliterate the layer lines. Then I used some sandpaper to get the finer details. If you want to make really nice looking 3D printed pieces for a cosplay, you're gonna have to do a lot of sanding, and I am so sorry. The rest of my 3D pieces didn't need any glue, so they're just gonna get the regular old prep. I found the files on Thingiverse last summer, so if they're still there, I will link them in the description. But there's the pieces for the collar, crown, belt, and bracers. I'm taking Bondo spot and glaze putty and putting it into a mixing container. Make sure that whatever you're using can stand up to acetone because that's what we're adding next. It is very poison soup. Again, put a respirator on. The acetone thins out the putty so it can seep into the layer lines of the print. Then I just painted all of that on my pieces with a chip brush. If it's a little messy, that's okay. It's all gonna get sanded down. I took some 120 grit and sanded everything until I could see the filament color. And then I sprayed it with automotive filler primer to fill in any remaining lines and sanded it down. I did the filler primer step twice and finished it with 400 grit sandpaper to get it super smooth. Then it was time to paint. I gave everything a base coat of black spray paint and then I did a coat of silver spray paint. But I decided that wasn't quite the right color, so I actually sprayed over this with a gunmetal color instead. Once it all dried, and you can see the gunmetal color here, I took some nail polish I have that matched the reference and painted on the gems. It took a few coats to get it opaque, but I really like the shiny finish. Then I took some black acrylic paint and applied it in the low spots of the pieces.
Melinoe has a spooky bone arm, which I don't know why, I haven't played the game. But this is where I get to introduce you to my fabric choices, which is very exciting. My sweater is not gonna play nice with this, but I used this metallic microdot spandex and it just looks so magical and witchy. The glove was super easy. I just used the turkey hand method and then I added a cuff of the same microdot metallic spandex in gunmetal just for her little like bicep armor.
This has become my favorite method for adding fake nails to a cosplay glove. I took a clear nail extension, and it has to be clear, and I painted on some gel nail glue to the extension. Then I pressed it in place on my nail and cured the gel really thoroughly under a UV lamp. This is faster than super glue and it really permanently bonds the nail to the fabric. If your fabric is thin, you can wrap the tips of your fingers in some really clear tape to prevent any accidental curing to your real nail. Then I used the same nail polish I did on the 3D printed pieces to finish off my manicure. Now I'm going to start working on Melinoe's armor, and I want to make it out of foam because foam is both easy to work with, cheap, and lightweight. Here's the thing I don't love about foam though. When you paint it, you can seal it and prime it really well, but it still kind of cracks. And it's a cosplay. It's not necessarily meant to last forever, but I do want my cosplays to last a long time. So I had an idea. Here is the dagger I made and painted earlier in the summer. And I thought what might be cool is if I made the armor out of foam and then covered it in this really gorgeous Mystique silver foiled spandex. I got all of this from Blue Moon Fabrics. The match to this is pretty close. So I got this color in gunmetal, and then for highlights and shadows I got mushroom silver and kind of a different gunmetal color, gunmetal and black, I think. But I think this is going to be a really interesting and fun kind of experiment. I started with the neck and collar armor. I took some 2mm craft foam and my foam circle cutter and cut out a neck hole. Then I drew out a large circle around the neck hole and cut it out with my X-Acto knife. I cut out an opening so I can actually get my head into it, and I ended up needing to trim down the edges to make it more of an oval shape. So after I refined it a little, I cut out some of my gunmetal spandex and then sewed it all around the edges.
And this is what it looks like now. It's not gonna play very nice with my microphone or my hoodie, but you get the gist. I think it turned out really great. I love the way the spandex looks on the foam a lot. Next, I made this corset belt piece, which isn't really a corset, but I used a corset pattern. I cut out my pattern on my darkest shade of metallic spandex and then sewed it together, and I made a lining out of neoprene from my stash. To help keep the belt from buckling, I sewed in some sewable boning, or rigoline, to the seams of the lining and sewed the top and bottom together. Then I cut some thick strips of my medium-toned gunmetal to bind the edges. And this is how that turned out. It needs some more details, but it's a really great base, and I just added a separating zipper at the back, so it's really easy to get in and out of. And that brings us to her leg armor.
I'm building the leg armor off of a pair of dance tights that I gradient dyed with orange synthetic RIT dye. As always with dyeing fabrics, use a pot that you will never, ever use for food. I thrifted mine. Your water needs to be at a gentle boil for it to work properly. I got the tights wet first and up and down in the dye to create the gradient. And there you go, flame feet. One of her legs is entirely covered in armor, so I measured around my ankle, thigh, and the length of my leg and made a quick spandex tube out of my gunmetal spandex. Once I got the tube to fit my leg, I put it on over the tights and folded in the edges so they would be neat and tidy, and then pinned the crap out of it. I so carefully took it off of my legs and used a zigzag stitch to permanently attach the leg armor to the tights piece. I did the same thing with the little upper thigh bangle she's got going on, and I love it. So far, the legs are my favorite part of this cosplay. She has a bunch of 3D moons on her legs, and I decided I would make those out of foam and cover them in fabric. So I cut out approximately 400,000 moon shapes of varying sizes on some 2mm craft foam and used all 3 shades of my metallic foil spandex to cut out little fabric squares I could use to cover the moons. I'm really hoping the different spandex shades make a highlight and shadows effect.
And that's everything I got done on Melinoe before now. The only things I didn't film were I painted some nude sandals with some Angelus paints to match her feet. And then I was deluded enough to think I could get this done for Katsucon, and I thought I could save time by buying a dress, and it's bad. It was like $12 from Amazon, and I can definitely make something that looks a little nicer than club dress that is made out of the worst fabric I have ever touched in my life. So now it's time to get this cosplay done. It's the beginning of October right now. I would love to have this done by the end of the month, or early November at least. I think she's about halfway through, so I think this is a very attainable goal because it's mostly details at this point. And since the leg armor is my favorite part so far, I'm feeling particularly called to finish up the moons on the legs, so let's get started.
I took my foam moons and fabric outside and used some spray-on Gorilla Glue on both the foam moons and the fabric to attach them. Unfortunately, this didn't stick very well. It peeled right up. I tried to avoid contact cement, and here I am, using it anyway. You can get contact cement in a spray can, but I am hesitant to aerosolize this stuff. It's already pretty nasty.
I have contact cemented all of the spandex to my foam moons, and I wish I would have just done that first. But they look really good, they feel a lot sturdier. I don't think that the fabric is gonna come off of the foam without a real fight. So now it's time to attach the foam moons to the tights. I'm sure I could figure out a glue solution for the foam moons to the tights, but this is a high movement area. Your legs move around a lot, and there's a lot of stretching with the tights that happens. And frankly, I just trust sewing more than I trust glue. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put the tights on my legs and use some clear thread and a little curved sewing needle, and that is gonna allow me to place the moon on my leg and then whip stitch around it. And I'm sure you'll be able to see dents where the needle goes in and out, but hopefully the clear thread kind of mitigates some of the visibleness of the stitches. I don't know, we'll see.
So I popped on my tights and held the first moon up to my leg and started sewing. You can definitely use a regular needle for this, and for some parts I needed to, but the curved needle really minimizes the self-stabbing of sewing something that's on your body. I used a whip stitch around the moons, which just means that I was going down and up, making the thread loop around the edges. This was a very time-consuming process, and I did have to contort my leg into some weird positions to reach where I was stitching. My lower back was not a fan of this activity. But overall, the moons look great. Then to finish off the tights, I whipped up some tubes of my fabric, braided them together to make a cuff, and you guessed it, hand sewed it onto the tights.
I'm going to work on the neck armor. I made this months ago, and I wish I would have just pushed through and made the neck piece, but I didn't, so we're doing that now. So this part wraps around and sits at my shoulders, and then there's kind of a turtleneck situation that's going on. In the art, Melinoe, kinda a giraffe neck, because she's not real. So I will, be fitting this to my own neck proportions. Fortunately, I have to draft a pattern on a curve, and I'm not incredible at that, but we're gonna do our best. The first thing I'm gonna do is measure around this inner curve, and while I could do that with a measuring tape, it's a little bit difficult because it's not the most curvy, you can't really fit it around a curve. So instead, I'm gonna take just a piece of string, start it here, just place that around, measure it that way. So my little piece of string is 13 inches. Wow, okay. So I'm going to need to make the part that attaches to the collar 13 inches. And that should be pretty simple. I'm kind of gonna eyeball it.
All I'm doing here is cutting out a rectangle of 2mm EVA foam that is definitely too tall for my neck. I took the bottom inch of that rectangle and cut out some thick notches. The notches are what are going to attach to the shoulder piece of the armor. I got the notches cut and did a test fit, and it worked. I took a piece of my gunmetal spandex and sewed it to the bottom of the neck piece, leaving the top edge loose. Next, I used hot glue to attach the neck and shoulders together at the notches. This required a lot of maneuvering the foam and fabric, but it worked quite well. The neck was still too tall, so I took my curved ruler and drew out where I wanted to cut some of the foam off. Now I can actually breathe in it. I sewed down the top edge to secure the fabric and trimmed away the excess. Now to add a closure, I'm using a separating zipper. Instead of pins or clips, I'm basting my zipper in before I sew it with the machine. I'm using a contrasting thread so it's easy to see and remove later. It definitely doesn't need to be neat. Then I put a zipper foot on my machine and secured the zipper to the armor. I gave it a test fit before I cut the excess zipper tape off. To hide the seam where the shoulder and neck pieces connect, I used a half foam dowel. I measured out how much I needed and then sewed a spandex tube to cover the foam dowel. You could probably just glue this. Then I hot glued the dowel to the connection point on the armor. Now to glue the 3D printed pieces to the neck armor. I stuffed some grocery bags with scrap fabric to shape the armor roughly to how the foam will be laying and held it down with some rubber bands. Then I spread some E6000 glue onto my print and stuck it in place. She also has a Hades symbol and a little scroll piece, so I added those as well. I secured it all with rubber bands while it dried overnight. I removed the rubber bands and everything stuck great. I needed to make some little tassels for the back part of the armor. Will these be seen? Probably not, but I'm making them anyway. I took a rectangle of my teal spandex and cut small strips, not all the way through the fabric, to create the fringe of the tassel. I used some hot glue and spread it at the top and rolled up my tassel. That one rectangle was long enough to make 2 tassels out of it, so I just cut it in half and also hot glued and rolled it. I made some thimble-shaped pieces out of my gunmetal spandex and glued the top of my tassels into those. The last step of my neck armor was hand sewing my tassels to the back. I, of course, had to do a test fit, which was a little finicky to get on, but it fits great. The tassels got a little wild in the back, but they do look good. Now we'll breeze on through the bracer and bicep armor because I'm going to hand sew all of the same foam moons to my spandex bases as I did on the tights. The bracer and bicep armor go on the right arm, but it's easier for me to sew with my right hand, so I'm putting them on my left arm for ease. I used a little tape to help secure the moon, and I used my curved needle to hand sew my foam moons to my armor. Like all hand sewing, this was time consuming, but after I was done getting shots sewing these for the video, I went and watched a movie on the couch and got most of it done during the runtime. I also sewed on a plain craft foam moon so I can contact cement this 3D printed moon to it for some extra 3D dimension. And that ended up working out really well. I just took it out to the garage, applied my contact cement to both the 3D printed piece and the foam, waited for it to get tacky, and then smushed them together.
You know it's getting serious when it is craft on the floor time. We're making the dress, and I already attempted making this dress last year. I tried to draft my own pattern. It went poorly, but that's okay. I still have the fabric, and in my wisdom, I have purchased a pattern. I got this from Indigo Patterns on Etsy. It's the Saffron Goddess pattern. I did have to print it all out. It's in 24 pieces, so I will be taping this together and cutting it out for probably 6.5 hours. Not really, but it takes a while. I love getting patterns from Etsy or from kind of fellow cosplayers. That's my preferred method if I need to buy a pattern. But man, cutting them all out is torture.
If you've ever been intimidated by buying PDF patterns online, I promise it's easy. You just print out your pattern and carefully line up the marks on the pattern pieces. Sometimes I'll even hold the paper up against a window to get really precise. Then you just tape all the pieces together and cut them out. The worst part is taping them together, but once you get through that, it's pretty smooth sailing. I'm using this orange stretch taffeta. The pattern doesn't call for stretch, but I really like how this looks and it doesn't wrinkle as much as regular taffeta. Then I cut out my pattern pieces. I won't show you every step of making the dress because I figure if you want to make this, you'll just buy the pattern, but I'll give you the broad strokes. I used 2 long straight stitches at the top and bottom to gather the halter top of the dress, and that was a major part of giving it the shape. The dress closes in the back with a zipper, and just like on the neck armor, I hand basted the zipper in instead of pinning it, and this is really life-changing. I will totally be doing this with all my zippers from now on because it installed perfectly. The dress is complete. I'm not gonna turn around until I put my tights on because, frankly, my entire butt is out. The pattern did warn of that though. It said in the instructions like, Melinoe's butt is out, your butt is going to be out. And so it is. I will definitely be experimenting with like some orange bikini bottoms under this, just for safety. But yeah, I didn't show a ton of making the dress because I figure if you want to make this dress, you will go get the pattern, and I will of course link it. But overall, it was pretty easy to follow, so I'm very happy about that. I think it's always nice to do a try-on of the things you have done, so I'm gonna do that. Oh, fellas! Whoa! Look at that! It's a cosplay! It's coming together! I've scooted you back a little bit more so you can see more of me, but here's my leg. I can turn around now because I have tights on and I feel a little less exposed. But I think next I'm gonna work on finishing up the belt, which will involve attaching this 3D printed piece to a spandex belt. Did I think this through? No. But I think there will be some sewing and gluing involved. I also really anticipated I was going to need to secure the neck armor to the dress, but it's honestly sitting really well. Everything's fitting, it's working. I'm so thrilled so far. I have these aglets I 3D printed that dangle the WWE belt buckle she has going on, so I took some green craft cord and pulled it through, tied a knot at the end, and added a dab of hot glue and secured the cord inside of the aglet. And now they're ready for the same tassels I made for my neck armor. But this time the tassels are getting tucked into the aglets, so it looks a lot neater. I wish I would have 3D printed more of these, but I didn't, so it's okay. Then I just wrapped the craft cord around the belt buckle a few times and secured it to the back with hot glue. Melinoe has some extra details on the corset that I didn't do last year, so I'm doing them now. I laid down my belt buckle and a piece of paper and sketched out a very wide U shape. I traced and cut out that shape on 2 layers of spandex 4 times. I sewed the pieces with a small zigzag stitch with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and flipped them inside out. I also ironed them flat using the lowest setting on my iron so I wouldn't damage the metallic microdots on the spandex. Then I laid out my spandex swoops and pinned them into place. I probably could have machine stitched this down and nobody would have noticed, but I don't mind hand sewing, clearly, and this will hide the stitches, so I hand tacked all of the swoops down. But since the other side of the swoops are going to be hidden underneath the buckle, I did machine sew those down. I gave the belt a quick try on and hand sewed the peaks and valleys of the swooshes down. Hand sewing takes time and it can take practice to get good at, but it's so valuable for the details of your cosplay. Now that the spandex base of the belt is done, it's time to add the 3D printed pieces. I'm going to start with these pieces that dangle from the bottom. I sewed a quick tube of my gunmetal spandex to glue them to. I took my pieces out to my garage and added contact cement to both the 3D printed pieces and the spandex to glue them together. Once it was dry and felt pretty sturdy, I hand sewed that to the bottom center of the belt. I wasn't entirely sure if it would work, but I hand stitched down the big centerpiece of the belt to the spandex. I wrapped the thread around it maybe 15 times, and it feels pretty secure. And if I need to reinforce it with glue later, I will. The last detail on the belt was some little tails to the front, and it's finally done. Time to finish up the glove. This was super simple. I mixed up fabric medium with some white acrylic paint and put it onto my glove. I had a diagram of a skeleton hand open so I could kind of mimic the shapes. And I just hand painted the shapes of the bones. I needed 2 coats for opacity, but it's important that you paint this and at least mostly let it dry while it's still on so you don't stretch and crack the paint. I also painted the arm bones and let it dry overnight. It's important to heat set your fabric paint so it doesn't wash out, so I put an old t-shirt scrap over the glove so I wouldn't damage the spandex and gave everything a good press on both sides. Next thing to finish was the crown. First, I laid out all of my leaf pieces and gave them a yellow, orange, and red gradient.
Now that I have my cute little leaves spray painted, it's time to actually build the crown. I've made cosplay crowns out of a few things. I've used wire, I've used Warbler, I've used 1/2 of macrame hoop, but this time I want to try using Rigoline. Rigoline is also known as sewable boning. I have it in my little belt back there. And I think if I just wrap it around my head and give it a little sew and then glue the stuff to it, I think this will work. First, I need to put on the wig to make sure that I am getting this the correct size for my head. oh no, this is my Melinoe wig, unstyled, clearly. I shouldn't have to do too much to it, but I need to steam down whatever we got going on here. If you're wondering, this is from Wig is Fashion, and my head is perhaps a little too large for it. It's so flippy. Hers doesn't do that. Hers goes straight down. All right, let's take a chunk of our Rigoline sewing clip to hold it in place. Ugh. And there we go. There's my noggin. Perfect. Ooh, that sounds not great. 2 layers might be a little tough. Use caution. And there we go, the base of our little Rigoline crown. I do want to back these with a little bit of plastic so they for sure stay on. But to start, I'm just gonna use a little bit of hot glue. We'll start with the moon. I hope I have enough leaves. If I don't, that's not gonna be fun. Ta-da! This camera died. Why? Why would you do that to me? now we just need to lay out the order that these are gonna go in. They go pointy side in. And now we just start gluing. Does look very cutie so far. Definitely gonna need to secure this with something other than hot glue. I can already feel it wanting to peel off so bad. Ooh, I got 6 left and this is the back. Ooh, I think I'll have enough. I hope I do. Hot! Hey, the glue's hot, the hot glue's hot. I have enough. Oh, I have enough. Put that out backwards. Shit. There we go, there we go, there we go. Oh, I can't believe that a year ago I predicted the correct amount of leaves I would need. Oh, this is good. This is very good. Let it dry for just a smidge so I don't get hot glue in my wig, because that you can't get out. You just simply can't get that out. Okay, 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 okay. That worked so well. Oh my gosh. I did not think. This is great. I might go in with a little bit of paint in between because you can see the wriggling a little bit through this, but honestly, it's not too bad. Oh, this is thrilling. Okay, now I just have to secure the back a little bit better and then the crown is done.
I did go in with some acrylic paint on the boning and paint in between the leaves to disguise it.
All right, we're back out in the garage to finish up the crown because I can already tell this hot glue doesn't really want to stay attached to my PLA pieces and the sewable boning. PLA does stick to itself, so my idea is to take some PLA I have on a roll and use this, a wood burning tool, to kind of plastic weld the PLA to more PLA. This wood burning tool does get very hot. You could also use a soldering iron, but this is what I have. Now I am doing this outside just in case I melt the Wriggling, because I don't know what kind of plastic that is and I don't know what kind of fumes it emits if it gets melted, so I'm outside. I'm also going to be using a respirator because safety absolutely comes first in cosplay. Let's go.
I snipped off small pieces of my plastic, which did tend to fly off in every direction. Then I positioned the PLA on the 3D printed piece up against the boning and very carefully melted it with my wood burning iron to both melt the plastics together and to sort of encapsulate the boning. I ran the flat side of the wood burning iron over the melted plastic to smooth it out as best I could. PLA melts at about 200 degrees Celsius, which is about 390 degrees Fahrenheit, so it is hot. If you are ever going to plastic weld, be extremely cautious and wear some gloves. Also, you can see the smoke coming up from the piece, so yeah, protect yourself in every way that you can.
The plastic welding on the crown actually worked so great. It feels really sturdy. I don't think any of these little leaves are gonna be falling off anytime soon. Once again, I cannot stress enough, if you are going to do any sort of plastic welding or anything with strong chemicals in general, you gotta wear a respirator. That's a non-negotiable. It is October 30th and I have one thing left to finish for this cosplay. So I'm making my deadline actually better than I anticipated, but it's to make the little bag she has sitting at her back. The bag is different because it doesn't really go with the rest of her color scheme. It is this lovely shade of lilac. I got some lilac vinyl off of Etsy. Etsy's a really good place if you need to get small quantities of vinyl. I didn't necessarily need a whole yard of this, but people will sell this for folks that make like the teardrop vinyl earrings. So I think this will be really, really simple. I've already made the pattern, which is really simple. It's just half circles at rectangles. So this is the front, this is gonna fold over, there's the top, and then this is just kind of my guide for how wide to cut this. Sewing it at a 5/8 inch seam allowance, and it should be pretty simple. So hopefully I can get that done fast, and then the cosplay will be done.
I traced out my pattern pieces onto the vinyl and cut them out. I pinned the pieces together and then sewed them using a Teflon foot. A Teflon foot is a great addition to your sewing machine. It just sticks less to textured fabrics. So the structure of the bag is the front piece, back piece with the flap, and then a sidewall. Pretty simple. I added a facing to the front flap and top stitched it down and trimmed the excess. I also stitched down the seam allowances a 1/4 inch away from the seam to keep them flat. I hand sewed on a purse magnet to keep the bag in place.
So apart from gluing on the little 3D printed piece, the bag is pretty much done. I have these 2 little tails sticking out, so I have a place to attach it to either the dress or the belt. I'm thinking the dress because I don't want this to drag the belt down if there's anything in it. And I was trying to think of a way to attach this to where it would be a little more secure than snaps, because I have had issues with things on snaps coming off before. So what I'm gonna try is some buttonholes. Most sewing machines can do buttonholes, so just check and make sure that yours came with a foot. I have to look up a YouTube tutorial every single time I do it. But after a few practice buttons on some scrap vinyl, I think I'm ready. So I'm just gonna mark this starting point on the bottom of the buttonholes, like a 1/4 inch away. And now, take my buttonhole foot and very deftly and skillfully put this into the thing. There we go, okay. And now, look mono hands, just kidding hands. We're gonna let this go. Oh, why is it every time it's on camera it sounds bad? It's not working. Why would you embarrass me like this? Okay, one more try with the buttonhole foot. But if it's not gonna work on this, figure something else out. Oh, it's doing better. All right, I had to help it along there a little bit, but we do have a buttonhole. Now to see if I can do a matching one. If it's a little off, that's okay. I will just set the buttons at different heights and nobody will know. This is not a competition piece. This is for fun, like all cosplay is, but especially right now. Right here, you can focus, you can do it. This one turned out ever so slightly wonky, but they're about the same height, so that's pretty good. Normally I would use a little pair of scissors to cut the fabric, but since this is vinyl, I'm gonna use a box cutter. Just gotta be very careful to not cut the threads. Or yourself. And there we go, that there's a buttonhole. And now you don't necessarily need to watch me sew on 2 buttons, it's just sewing on buttons. But just underneath here, I'll pop these on, and then this will hang from underneath here. And then, little belt bag. So now I'm just gonna take this out to the garage and glue it on, and the bag's gonna be pretty much done.
I ended up gluing on the 3D printed piece with super glue, which worked fine, and the buttons also worked great. I just had a couple finishing details, like wrapping her scythe and dagger in some of my orange fabric, and Melinoe was done. Time for the reveal. And with that, Melinoe is finally complete. I would say this cosplay is relatively simple, but it still took me over a year to finish it. And of course there are things I would change on it like any cosplay, but I'm really glad that I took the time with it to make it nice and I didn't rush it. I find that whenever I rush something on a cosplay, I'm never 100% happy with it, so I try to avoid doing that wherever I can. But yeah, everything fits. Overall, I'm really happy with it. I'm really excited to wear it to Katsucon. Finally, I can get it on all by myself, which
is huge. I'm also not really a contact lens wearer, so if you can see, I just did my eyes 2 different colors to mimic her 2 different color eyes. And I actually really like how it turned out. I'll just speed run some of my favorite pieces of the cosplay. The crown may be one of my favorite parts. I also like the arm a lot more than I thought I would. I put off painting the bones on this hand for a long time because I was a little nervous. I do still like the legs, the dress fits really well. Yeah, I feel like I learned a lot on this cosplay and I'm really excited to take those skills into all of my future ones. But of course, as always, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. I'd be happy to answer them. And if you want to see more cosplay content, be sure to subscribe to this channel. With this project done, I'm excited to be starting my next one and to take you along with me. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to see more of my cosplay content, you can find me on TikTok and Instagram. And with that, I will see you next time. Bye!